We are welcoming our next keynote speaker, and Ralph Acampora, who is Associate Professor of Philosophy at Hofstra University in New York. He conducts research in the fields of environmental philosophy, bioethics, and animal studies. He is the author of Corporal Compassion, Animal Ethics, and Philosophy of Body, which emphasizes the phenomenal and somatic commonality of living beings, and Philosophy of Body that seeks to displace any notion of anthropomorphic emphasis in viewing the moral experiences of non-human living beings. Ralph is also an editor of Metamorphoses of the Zoo and Nietzschean in Bestiary. Ralph served in serving as an associate editor of Humanalia, the journal, and review editor of Society and Animals, respectively. And Ralph will give a presentation on the topic, Current Identity and Prospects of Animal Studies, Terminology of Animality, Plant Studies, Disability Studies, Living Body, à Merleau-Ponty. Ralph, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much. You'll have to bear with me because I'm just recovering from COVID and I may have to speak at a lower and slower pace uh, just because of sore throat. Thank you for having me here. It's an excellent gathering that you've put together. What I want to take some time out to look at today are two or three areas that all have to do with the kind of constitution of our subject matter in animal studies and its relation to um, other sorts of interfaces in adjacent fields, plant studies, disability studies, and so forth. So let me get right into it. What we call animals is an important dimension of how we relate to them. Not too long ago, scholar and advocate Lisa Kemmerer noticed a linguistic gap in our discourse about animals, namely that we, at least in English, had no agreed upon term for the set of animals that does not include humans. She proposed the locution animal, A-N-Y-M-A-L, to cover that set, a contraction or condensation of any plus animal. The idea was to have a single word term to refer to all those animals who are not members of my own species, a term that is not negative like non-human and which stokes people's attention with its novelty in order to get them to consider and speak about our tendency to separate ourselves from the animal kingdom. It has been nearly 2 decades since Kemmerer's proposal, and I think it's fair to say that animal has not caught on in any widespread fashion. This is perhaps due to its lexical oddity. In any event, I should like to point out the favorability of the locution other animals instead. First, it is germane to indicate that all three candidates, animal, other animals, non-human animals, will imply a dualism. That is the nature of the linguistic gap which it is meant to cover. Non-human animals does this negatively, and that is a shortcoming for it. Of the three, other animals is the least technical and flows from the tongue quite naturally. There isn't a hint of artificiality in other animals, and this is a point in its favor. Furthermore, other animals lends itself to putative extensions quite readily. Suppose, for instance, we wanted to refer to all other life forms beside the human. Well, then we could easily make use of other organisms. As we take the lives of plants more seriously, this sort of locution will be in greater need. Moreover, as you at this very conference will certainly notice, other animals in English has a straightforward path to translation into another language, whereas animal is stymied in translation. Most languages will be able to preserve the bipartite construction of other animals and not have the resources to preserve the pun in animal. Another aspect of favorability for other animals is the way, despite the dualism, the locution manages to identify the speaker or writer as an animal, her, or himself. Relatedly, animal says more than it means. It is not truly in reference to any animal, only those who are not humans. Thus, animal emphasizes an element of human exceptionalism that other animals leaves dormant or indeed contests. Taking all these considerations into account, I think it is fair to say that other animals does it better than animal and certainly than non-human animals. Unfortunately, It is non-human animals, the locution with the least to recommend it, that has caught on the most. I recommend a switch to other animals, even though this may take self-conscious effort at first. It is worth the effort because it helps us relate to other animals in a better fashion, better than non-human animals, which is haunted by negativity, better than animal, which is hobbled by oddity. We don't want to relate to other animals in a negative vein or as if they were fundamentally odd. They are not strangers, but rather fellows, and it will help to relate to them in fellowship if we refer to them that way as well. There is, of course, a history of various ways of relating to other animals. Perhaps the least pleasant is the mode of pestilence. Along this vector, other animals are cast as evil spreaders of contagion or chaos. They are made killable by this persona. Just think of the agencies designed to handle them. Usually, the moniker is some variation of animal control. When other animals are related to as pestilential, we also denigrate ourselves through a hypervigilance on disease that overlooks our natural immunities. Another way in which we relate to other animals is as friends. This relationship conjures cozy imagery of companionship. It is at the opposite pole of the spectrum from pestilence, with human and other animals taking on positive roles in relation to each other. Paul Shepard was critical of seeing other animals as friends. He thought it reeked of Disney-esque anthropomorphism. My take would be toned down some. The friend relation is descriptive of only a fraction of human-animal interactions, basically ones that involve highly domesticated species such as dogs and horses. That brings us further along in our consideration of relationships had between humans and other animals. The last kind of relationship I will mention has already come up, is that of fellowship. Fellows follow parallel lives with similar challenges and adaptations, and they do not share the chumminess of friends. Henry Beston put it best when he referred to other animals as other nations. The related idea that Sue Donaldson and Will Kimlicka have put forward is the notion of other animals as having a good deal of their own autonomy, sovereignty, and thus being fellow citizens or other nations. This picture fits best with wild animals. I have charted ways of referring to other animals and ways of relating to them. Is there any connection between the two? Not obviously, but I will venture some hypothetical suggestions. Non-human animals fits into, with its negativity, the pestilential mode of relating. Animal, with its openness, is akin to the friendly mode of relation. Other animals, with its scent of peerage, is closest to fellowship. These are just suggestions, let me repeat, but I hope they can help us to navigate the sometimes stormy seas of animal studies. We've been considering the implicit object of study in our field, namely animality. It will help to consider how an adjacent and related field constitutes itself. Therefore, let us now delineate a direction in which philosophical botany could fruitfully go. In his magisterial survey of organismic ontology, Charles Wolfe opines on the essence of organic life, that we find it where we have a sense that there is somebody home in the organism, so to speak. And I would comment that this is as good a place to start as any. To build on this intuition, we have recourse to the eminent Estonian theoretical biologist Jakob von Uexküll's concept of the Umwelt of an organism. Beyond its literal meaning of an environment, this term is used by him to designate a life world shaped by speciated spheres of sensation, composed, that is, by different modes of perception. And all kinds of organisms have their distinctive variety of Umwelt, including plants, according to some later followers of Uexküll. For recent commentator Carollo, the key here is to jettison the idea of interpretive subject from the thought of Umwelt and work instead with the notion of a communicative organism at the heart of any given life world. Arguably, this conceptual move unlocks worldhood in moving from the animal to the plant kingdom. There is thus the possibility of non-zoocentric forms of interiority. Uexküll himself did not go in this direction, primarily, if not exclusively, absorbed as he was in zoology. He did allow that plants occupy a so-called dwelling shell or wohnhöhle, a concession that would presumably put them on par with hermit crabs. the paradigmatic species in this respect. Here we see, as we did earlier, the importance of habitat to the contours of organismic, including vegetal worldhood. Continuing on now, Luba and Alfonso report that plants are perceived to be animate biologically because they are alive and move, albeit in place. On the other hand, there is the perception that they are inanimate because their movements are so slow and different from locomoting animals such as ourselves. As against this latter observation, it is important to point out that the advent of time-lapse videography has helped us to enhance our perceptions of botanical motion. Plants appear sessile to us, yes, but on their slower time frame, they are actually moving in many ways, writhing, twisting, squirming, wriggling, etc. When it comes to assessing intentionality and agency, the former property is defined by Luba et al. As the ability to perceive and act upon the environment, while of the latter, it is said that being is agential when it is self-defined as an individual, produces its own activity in the environment, and regulates itself in its activity along certain norms. These authors conclude on a skeptical note, namely that putative experience and sentience in plants are black boxes that we cannot penetrate with the epistemic tools available to us. Now, no less an authority than Edmund Husserl, the grandfather of phenomenology, he had precursors, of course, in Hegel and others, but he's a titan figure in the field. He expresses doubts about vegetal experience. Trans-specific phenomenology, he says, does not go so far that definite interpretation of the plant as animate organism has become possible. Yet, this skepticism is tempered by bringing other factors onto the scene. He says we should not exclude plants having sensitivities. However, we would be incapable of recognizing them because there is lacking any bridge of empathy and of immediately determined analysis. This stance, taking a position astride epistemological doubt and ontological allowance, is echoed in Thomas Nagel's celebrated work on the alterity of consciousness. What is it like to be a bat? There, the author grants that there is something it is like to be a bat, but denies that we could know or have cognitive access to such an alien interiority. Even the negative part of this judgment can be mitigated by returning to Husserl for clues going forward. Namely, he mentions a bridge of empathy and immediately determined analysis. As it turns out, two commentators have found elsewhere in Husserl's own corpus a three-step procedure for operationalizing the native empathic perception of another living being. Three steps include, first, eidetic self-modification, second, intercorporeal pairing, and thirdly, appresentation of an alien field of experience. The first step involves exercises of the imagination to alter one's sense of self. The second is equivalent to bodily resonance or the somatic sympathy or symbiosis, what I've called symphusis, that I discuss in my corporal compassion text. The third brings about a biophenomenological recognition of elementary subjectivity in the alien animate organism. The result of taking these steps is threefold. First, we can gain essential insight into what it is like to have a live body or living body for every living being, plants included. Second, some physical connection emerges in that my own live body enables me, by drawing behavioral parallels between my body and the encountered entity, to perceive the latter as another kind of living physical flesh and blood being. Third, it becomes the case that I attribute life, inner life, a distinct primordial sphere of live or living experience to the alien body as such. Tying these steps together, then, Gates and Voros reach the conclusion that any interspecies bridge of sympathy immediately determined analysis can be built and employed into the realm rather of vegetal life forms. Thus, we come to access a common corporality with conanimate organisms, which can be shared even with plants. According to Garrido, this means that contrary to Uxkall's theory of separate sensate bubbles, we partake in the same world. So, third section. Another arena of identity and interface for animal studies is that of disability concerns. I strongly believe that the ongoing dialogue between disability studies and animal studies bears a fruitful exchange for both fields. A salient aspect of the former is its highlighting of the fact that finitude characterizes us all at and during different times of our lives. Handicaps are not a niche occupation of a minority of people with impairments. Rather, they seep into typical bodies at and because of different life stages, infancy and senescence, for instance, and for periods of illness and injury that punctuate their whole lifespan. To recognize this is already to acknowledge the proliferation of non-normate bodies across and beyond the species Homo sapiens, and thus to realize that the type able human is not the only or best site of embodied worldhood. This insight bends back onto our notions of disability, namely that they are inflected by speciated registers of somatic difference. So we see that there is a mutually provocative and helpful dialectic situated at the nexus between animal studies and disability studies. And we have Sunara Taylor and others in disability studies and animal studies to thank for this. It may come as an unwelcome surprise, therefore, that I will now turn to a point of conflict between animal studies and disability studies. And what's more, actually defend the so-called argument from marginal cases, or AMC. Notorious from animal ethics literature and activism, that is. The argument disarms anthropocentric dismissals of animal interests that they are dumb, stupid, or irrational, on pain of the anthropocentrists having to similarly reject the interests of intellectually impaired humans, or else admit speciesism. Some, including Taylor, see the AMC as a backstab maneuver perpetrated by callous animal advocates upon the disabled community. In my view, however, the rhetorical engine of the argument comes from its eschewal of both humanity and reason as necessary conditions for moral standing. Consequently, it upholds sentience over sapience or species as the relevant determinant of moral considerability. When somebody deploys the AMC, they're counting on, and most often getting, an audience response that actually affirms rather than abuses both animality and disability. There are outliers, but the ones who bite the bullet to the detriment of animals and the disabled include people like R.G. Frey. They are exceptions, however, who prove the rule. Thus, on my account, the AMC mobilizes and enlarges compassion and sympathy as a wedge against both humanist speciesism and ableist bigotry. And so, far from being abandoned, as some critics urge, it should be proliferated instead. That said, to be responsibly rehabilitated, the AMC should be reframed in view of the fact that its name is indeed offensive, as the diction of marginality does connote a put down. Alternative monikers include argument from intellectual impairment, AII, from cognitive dysfunction or difference, ACD, or most simply and capaciously from neurodiversity, AN. And so we see that it matters who we align with in plant or disability studies, for instances, and relatedly, what we call our subject of research in the choice of nomenclature. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thanks a lot for this amazing presentation in your speech. And if you still have some energy and to answer questions for the next 10 minutes, would be great.
I have my interpretation set to English, so we'll see if it works.
Great. And yeah, we have some questions. You can type your questions in any language, in English or Russian, or you can ask your questions by raising a hand. And I think, Dmitry, you had a hand with a question. Yes, Dmitry.
Ральф, большое спасибо за такой прекрасный
Ralph,
доклад,
thank you very much
очень
for such a
ясный,
brilliant talk,
наводящий
very
нас
clear
из
and
современных понятий,
very informative
касаемых animal studies.
as far
У меня
as
такой
contemporary
вопрос.
terms in animal studies are concerned.
Почему именно
So my
разум
question is,
является
why is it precisely the
столь важным?
mind that is
Это в
so
дополнение
important?
к третьей части вашего
I wanted to
выступления.
ask it as far as the third
Если
part
посмотреть
of your
современную
talk is
критику,
concerned. If we
эпистемология,
take a look at the
философы
contemporary
рассматривают
criticisms of
эпистемологию как скорее
epistemology,
европейский инструмент,
philosophers think that
европейское
epistemology
изобретение.
is a
И
European
если мы
invention.
вернемся в биологию
And
обратно,
if we go back
можно
to
посмотреть,
biology,
что одноклеточные животные,
we can see that
собственно,
one cell
поедают
animals
других одноклеточных животных или
basically
растений
eat other
без
plants or
наличия нервной
animals
системы. И вопрос,
that
можно ли тогда
do not
говорить о
have any
разуме
nervous system as
вне
such. So I was just curious whether
наличия
one
нервной
can
системы.
talk about the
Может
mind
быть,
as
следует
such
говорить о
if
единстве
there
существ
is no
не на основании аргумента
if there is
наличия
no
разума
nervous
и
system. So I
взаимопонимания,
was
а,
thinking that
например, на
maybe
основании
the
наличия,
debates could be based
ну, не знаю,
not
там,
on the
возможности съесть
absence
другое
of
живое
understanding,
существо
but on the
или на
capacity to
возможности,
eat another
ну,
being
съесть представителя своего вида,
or
другой
eat a
животное, другое
representative of one
растение.
species,
Поэтому
another
таким
animal, or
образом,
another
возможно, такая
plant.
дискриминация будет являться
Thus,
дискриминацией по
probably,
отношению к другим видам
actually,
или к особям своего вида.
when we refer
Это
to the
будет
mind,
являться
this could
более
be the ground
фундаментальным
for
и более
discrimination and maybe the more
элементом
fundamental
единства всех живых существ,
element
чем
for the
его
unity of
наличие
living
разума,
beings
которое
is
крайне
not them
сомнительно.
being
Например,
sentient
в
or
случае
not,
эйфории.
but rather their ability to
Это
eat
первый
other
вопрос.
species. So, I mean, it is especially true for
Второй вопрос.
single-celled
Вопрос
animals.
я как
This
раз
is my first
сформулирую
question. So,
действительно
if I
таким
put it
образом.
really
Не
short,
является
I will
ли
summarize my question.
включение разума в
Do you think
концепцию
that
Animal
including
Studies, ну,
the
таким
concept of the mind
романтическим
into animal studies,
эпистемологическим
isn't
элементом,
it a
который
romantic
унаследуем скорее
epistemological
европейского
element
рассудка?
that we inherit from European philosophy? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's interesting what you say and what you chart out. In my own work, I have tried to depart from grounding the habit or custom in animal ethics to ground the moral standing of other animals in a kind of philosophy of mind. And I tried my best to move beyond that and look at it instead as being based on something more like a philosophy of body. And I think that this is more promising, it turns out, for reaching out to other kingdoms, such as plants, for instance. So I agree with you that we should have a skepticism about assuming that mind is the be all end all of the ethical game, so to speak, for interspecies ethics. And one step in that direction is to move beyond a moral psychology and into what I would call a moral somatology, interested in the somatic states of the living bodies involved. Now, you go one step further, I think it's promising, talking about metabolism and eating being the most important register here. Um, that could be very helpful, actually. Lately, I've given some attention to, and though I'm not yet settled upon how to handle the so-called problem of predation from a moral perspective, metaphysically speaking. But thank you for your input here. I think it's promising.
Thank you for your question and thank you for the answer. I have actually a question, Ralph, if you don't mind. So in regard to the terms that we're using towards other animals, I'm personally using mostly like Modern Human Animals by David Abram that he presents in his book with Modern Human Geography, Modern Human World, because it's, as you said, like non-human is a term which is negates humanity in other animals. But what do you think of modern human? whether this is something that it's not just otherness, being the other, but more than someone who we are.
Yeah, maybe so. I know and like Abram's work, and I think he does a great thing with it. Um, and the term more than human has caught on in many places either. There are two things that make me leery about more than human as a locution. Um, First of all, it has a hint or connotation of a kind of supersensory, transcendent, or mystical thing going on. And I am constituted vocationally such that I'm skeptical about such things in my philosophic upbringing and training. Um, then the other thing is that it can be tied, and sometimes is tied explicitly by so-called transhumanists to their agenda and whatnot. And this is a whole different ball game whatsoever of uh, building superhuman people out of prosthetic devices and age-defying medicine and things of this sort that I'm quite sure uh, Abram himself would have no truck with. Um, yeah.
Thank you for your answer. Yeah, we have just a couple of minutes before the next presentation. If you have any other questions or comments, please let us know.
Прошу прощения, можно короткий вопрос?
Can I ask a short question? Is that okay?
Yeah, Dmitry, and then Carrie, I think also. Okay, Dmitry, your short question.
Ральф, спасибо большое еще раз за ваш доклад.
Ralph, thank you very much again for the brilliant talk you have shared with us. My question is about how your ideas and just contemporary philosophical ideas refer to Jainism, for example, with the concept of ahimsa. Is there any contemporary understanding of ahimsa in the framework of your philosophy or just contemporary philosophy, especially ahimsa, compassion towards mollusks or other animals? Thank you.
That's a great question. And although I haven't explicitly done it myself, there are people that I've collaborated with who are doing such things. There was a conference a couple of years ago, and then later a book just coming out now based on the conference that's called Knowing Life. And it goes into matters of cross-cultural, indigenous, and the tying between epistemology and ethics together. So I'd recommend that text to you, Knowing Life again. It's expensive, but if you have access to a good library, they can get it for you.
Thank you, Ralph, and Dmitry for the question, and Carrie, your question or comment.
Oh, hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, hi, Ralph. Thank you for being here, even though you're sick.
Yes.
That's nice. I really enjoyed your talk. I haven't started using queer theory yet, but what do you think about how that overlaps with disability studies and just the notion of talking more about diversity within critical animal studies and the animal rights movement? Because I think queer theory and disability studies does that. That allows for these other animals to not have to be so human, and even what is human as a benchmark if there's a lot of diversity within our own species. So I just wanted to see if queer theory has been useful to you.
I haven't gotten there yet myself, but intersectionality is sort of the name of the game, I think, going forward in the future here for our field.
Definitely.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Carrie, for the question, and Val for the answer and for amazing presentation. And we wish you a full recovery. Thank you for being today with us. It was, yes, amazing. And
Thank you.
so thank you a lot.